just to introduce myself, I do have two birth dates, my physical birth date and my spiritual birth date, so you know. If you'd like to know more about a spiritual birth date, you certainly can talk to me. I'll tell you about it. It was the faithful witness of a Christian brother at North Texas State University the night before I was transferring to the University of Kansas, changing majors, that shared the gospel with a group of us beer-drinking buddies. And I said, I need to get right with God. I went back to my dorm room, knelt next to my cot, told God I was sorry for being a sinner. I asked him into my life that night, and I have not been the same since. That's 50 years ago. Praise God. So if you need to know more about that, you can certainly ask me. I'm going to use some pictures here. I don't think there are watermarks on them. I don't check real closely, but I've been trying to be better at it. But I do beg the fair use clause, which says that if you're giving a presentation and you're using graphics downloaded from the internet, if you're not making money off of that routine, and I'm not making any money doing this, it's fair to use. Enough said. Regarding the pictures of the proteins that I'll be showing you tonight, they are from a protein data bank, PTB, online that anybody can access and see these clips, pictures, stills, and what have you. And as the protein data bank says right here, they are all free, no copyright restrictions, and made fully and freely available for both non-commercial and commercial use. So that's what I'm doing, and this is sort of what I'm talking about. This is what I'm talking about tonight, photosynthesis. Not a light topic. It is amazing, and I'll be bringing this slide up again later on, as you see here. This is inside of a typical plant cell at a level. This is where the reactions that you know of as photosynthesis occur. Photosynthesis is one of those sciencey terms that people like to toss out there on occasion when you feel like you need a shot of science or to look kind of smart, and so you say, oh yeah, photosynthesis. And it's just, it is a load, and we've learned so much about this process. Our Creator God is, there's no word. There's no word for this anymore, okay? I won't say amazing, awesome. This just falls so far short. We're looking at something here that, in our minds, I've got to say, how long did he spend thinking on this? And did God spend any time planning this? Or did he take a lot of time? Okay, he doesn't live in time, that's right. So how far in eternity did he, to put this together for what it does, there's just no words for it. So we'll get into more detail. This is what happened and why I am late. At the last minute, I decided to put a video clip in here just to show you guys. This was one recently done at the TEDS. If you've ever seen TEDs online where they talk about certain topics, I forgot her name. I was going to put her picture up here and her name, and I didn't get it, but this is from Harvard. She did a clip which kind of gives you a better feel for what it's like at the level of a protein in a system, in a living system, and what's going on. Most of my pictures are static. They're not very dynamic. They're just like that one you saw before. It's just a layout, and I'll talk about the parts and so forth. But you understand that in reality, it doesn't look like that. Proteins have three-dimensional features to them. The cell is three-dimensional. There's activity going on. There's chemistry going on. Molecules are moving. So in order to give the lay person a better feel for what that's all about, I picked up this clip, and so just take a minute here. Oh, is our audio? Our audio is not connected yet, so hold on 1 second.
Cells, like these neurons, proteins are constantly synthesized, and any misfolding could lead to protein aggregation. The persistence of non-functional protein aggregates in neurons has been associated with many diseases. Proteins are molecular workhorses of the cell. They have many roles, including the assembly of intracellular structural support and molecular motors, or the catalysis of biochemical reactions. The functions of proteins depend on their specific three-dimensional folding and stability in the cellular environment. Proteins occupy up to 40% of the cytoplasmic volume.
There's going to be one protein in this that you ought to recognize if you were at my last presentation. And see if you can pick up on it as it goes by. I'm just giving you a hint. You haven't seen it yet. It hasn't been displayed for you yet.
Their specific three-dimensional folding and stability in the cellular environment. Proteins occupy up to 40% of the cytoplasmic volume, creating a molecular crowding that increases the risk of protein aggregation between hydrophobic patches in unfolded regions of proteins. Targeted degradation by proteasomes normally limits the consequences of protein aggregation. Not all proteins diffuse freely. Vesicles transport to their final destination secreted proteins, membrane proteins, and proteins targeted to intracellular organelles. For example, vesicles destined to late endosomes are formed at the surface of Golgi stacks. With the help of clathrin molecules that assemble into a coat, promoting the curvature of the Golgi membrane. Shortly after their release, the vesicles shed their clathrin coat and adapter proteins. Synaptic vesicles undertake a long journey along axons. To overcome limited diffusion caused by molecular crowding, motor proteins transport vesicles on long fibrous proteins called microtubules. Few kinesin motors move each synaptic vesicle toward the plus end of microtubules. Free kinesin adopts an inactive folded conformation. Upon binding with the vesicle, the kinesin stalk region unfolds, and the two kinesin heads are free to interact with the microtubule. The ATP-dependent switch between microtubule-bound and free states leads to the alternating swing of the heads that characterizes the hand-over-hand walk of kinesin. Conformational changes and electrostatic steering promote unidirectional movements of vesicles.
You remember that one?
Yep.
Kinesin, the motor protein? Yeah. Those proteins are designed to move. They change locations. Tonight's protein is not going to be about that. Now I'm feeling a little like this after watching that movie there. But it's like that in the cell. Things are moving. Everything is kinetic. Everything is jittering around, and it's not static like a typical picture. And I was going to talk about plants. That's what we're about today. And these, of course, were the motor proteins I showed you before. This was ATP synthase, if you were here for that. That's a protein that literally moves, changes position, and does work as such. And here's kinesin. And these were some of the clips from the dynein and kinesin presentation that I did. These proteins are made to change locations and will do so under the right conditions and with the right concentrations of ATP as the driving force. That's a protein. That is not a living thing. For those who weren't here for that presentation, that's not a living thing. That is a molecule. And it's changing shape. The net effect of the shape change is a walking type motion. Now, on the third day, let the land produce vegetation. Which day? Oh, see, I shouldn't have said that. Blah. All right, so this is the verses of Scripture where God created plants. It's all about plants tonight. And photosynthesis, God saw that it was good, and there was evening and morning, the third day. That was the day plants were made. A little picture I took, I was in Ecuador someplace, if I remember correct. God said, I give you every seed-bearing plant on the face of the whole earth and every tree that has fruit with seed in it. They will be yours for food. And to all the beasts of the earth and all the birds in the sky and all the creatures that move on the ground, everything that has a breath of life in it, I give every green plant for food. And it was so. Genesis 1:29. God made the plants, and He made them for our benefit. And although when I get to this topic, or used to get to this topic in biology, I pretty well lost all the kids because plants, Mr. Michael, are boring. to some extent, I had to agree with them, because, well, they don't move, they don't have the sensory outputs and inputs that animals do. But they certainly are important, very important. You would not be here and sitting here tonight if it weren't for plants, just so you know. And it was God who took Adam and put him into a garden to work it and take care of it. Genesis 2:15. So this is a shout out to gardeners in here. Where are you? Come on, get them hands up. Gardeners, huh? I'm going to talk a little bit about that before I actually get back to Photosystems. Tree of Life was also in the garden. I was going to spend some time on that, but I won't. Here's a real tree in the Kalak tree, Sitka spruce in Washington, state of Washington. Look at this thing. It's still growing even though it got undermined. And here's the same tree, a shoreline look. And it's growing to this day along Route 101 in the state of Washington, if you want to see a really cool looking massive tree. But here we are. There's the gardeners. We're out there, right? Well, here's some of my activities. I like growing tall sunflowers, and I do. This was my garden last year out there. So I used to do sun sugar tomatoes. You got to get those. They sell them at Home Depot. My grandkids just devour these. They are sweet. Sun sugar tomatoes. Anybody else know of these yet? Okay. Put that on your list for this. Spring's coming. I ordered my seeds yesterday. Adrian, did you buy yours?
Not yet. I'm waiting for a sale.
That's Adrian. He's waiting for the sale. I won't say what nationality you are, Adrian, but Spronk is the last name. Anyway, he'll get them on sale. I ordered mine from Burpee, and I got to show you my carrots. Look at this one. I grew that thing. Yes, that's one of mine right there in the batch, and I don't know what I did to that guy. I wish I could do it again, but it happened. It was a monster. But speaking about growing plants and harvesting, there are some other ones that I like growing, the really big sunflowers, and of course cucumbers. We all grow tomatoes and so forth. Here's one. I told you, Jim. Where are you? Oh, my buddy Jim Ford. He's sitting back. He's in the crowd right now. That's his pumpkin. 1,655-pound pumpkin, right, Jim? Yep. And man will get his fingers into God's creation, and that's okay. God told us to take care of and get to know his creation, and so this is okay. So there are these guys and gals who take it upon themselves not to just grow a pumpkin, but to grow a pumpkin. Can you imagine? That's 3/4 of a ton, isn't it? Plus? Man, good job, Jim. Wow. Photosynthesis, it all comes down to this process. We don't grow things, we don't make any of the plant unless we can do photosynthesis. And we're going to talk about how God set this up, how it works tonight. Basically, what happens is, in this process known as photosynthesis, we will take solar energy and some carbon atoms, as you see them up there, and then, let's see if I got my pointer. Yeah, carbon atoms in the form of carbon dioxide with solar energy. And if we run it through the chemistry called photosynthesis, what we end up doing is building a molecule of glucose sugar, and what's holding the atoms together is some of that energy which came from the sun. And now it's locked up in these chemical bonds in a very transportable molecule called glucose, and this energy then can be taken by cells, plant cells, moved. The sugar can be moved throughout the plant, and wherever chemistry is needed, where energy is needed, this glucose molecule can be broken down and the energy in the bonds used to build other molecules. In essence, build plant parts, the fruit, the seeds, whatever, but you have to get solar energy entrapped, and in a form that is transportable within the plant, and then it can be turned loose in a process called respiration. I'll show you that in a minute. Now, a couple other things about, in order to do this, the plant does need water, and I'm going to show you why in a minute. Very important. And in doing this, plants give off oxygen, which is very important to animals. We have to have a supply of oxygen. And in a little bit, I'll tell you a problem that the evolutionists have with this oxygen production and the oxygen in our atmosphere. It doesn't help evolution when it comes to the origin of life. Oxygen is a highly reducing compound, oxidizing compound, and as such it tears up molecules, and I'll show you that a little bit later. Right here is the reverse process. Now you know this as respiration. You've heard of respiration. You ought to know that it's almost the exact opposite of photosynthesis. Respiration is a process that takes the glucose sugar molecule and breaks it down back to carbon dioxide and water and releases energy. That energy coming from the bonds that were holding the carbon atoms together. So respiration is undoing photosynthesis. And here's the mystifying part of it all. When does photosynthesis happen? When the light's on. You got to have light. You got to have sunlight, and when you have sunlight and you have a plant and photosystems, you can make these sugars. But remember, when the sun goes down or the lights go off or the photosynthesis, I'm going to get it up. It quits. It's over. Now, when it comes to tearing down the sugar molecules that were made in photosynthesis, respiration, how often does that go on? All the time. 24/7, constantly burning sugars, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. In fact, if you stop burning sugars and utilizing sugars, there's only one thing that can happen to you. You're dead. The fact that you're sitting here alive right now means you're respiring. You're consuming these products made in photosynthesis, and photosynthesis only happens when the lights are on. Let's say half a day. What does that say about the productivity of photosynthesis? High. Huge. When the lights are on, plants have to make enough sugar to last not only animals 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, but believe it or not, plants respire too. 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Plants are respiring all the time, just like you are. And yet photosynthesis to support respiration only takes place when the lights are on, wherever that's at. It means there has to be a lot of plants out there. They got to support themselves and animals, and they have to put out enough to support them for their life and their own life 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Sugar is to living systems what the little Lego block is to Lego land. It is the fundamental unit off of which everything you see in a living organism and all the activities that they do work from. A simple glucose molecule. So, very important, very important. When God set up making the photosynthesis, understand He said, I need to utilize a source of energy. Living systems are going to need energy. I need to be able to get energy to them 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, constantly. Where am I going to get that energy? Well, He thought the sun. And so the solar energy, our sun, burning constantly, provides us with enough energy when we trap it to support all living systems, all day long, all month long, all year long, all your life long. And your children's lives long, your grandchildren's lives long. Now, another thing about plants you ought to know as we begin. When you look at a plant, that entire mass, that plant, all of the matter, the leaves, the stems, the roots, the fruit, all of it, that mass, quiz question, came from the ground where it pulled up all those minerals and assembled them into the right form to become a tree. True or false? See? False. All that mass comes from the air. 99% of the mass of every plant does not come from the ground. It comes from the air. Carbon dioxide in air is taken in. In the process of photosynthesis, and this actually in the energy, convert into all the tissues, all the cells that make up a plant, all of its leaves, all of its stems. It all came from carbon which came out of the air. The experiment was done, I think his name was von Helmut. Someone can help me out there, biology teachers. I can't remember. He did it. He simply grew a plant and he kept weighing the pot with the soil in it. And he was wondering, what in the world? This plant's getting bigger and bigger and the pot weighs the same. There's no change in the mass of the soil. So how does this plant getting mass? And thus the discovery of carbon dioxide and the uptake of carbon dioxide. Isn't that amazing? Okay, so here he is. This is what God made. To capture sunlight energy and get it into a sugar molecule, you need this. That's a photosystem. And it is a mega protein complex. 51 different proteins are needed to come together to make the one unit. It includes 19 different ligand strands, plus a host of about 30 pigment molecules, chlorophylls, chlorophyll A's, chlorophyll B's, anthocyanin, xanthophylls, and these also make up a part of this complex. All of this complex was designed by our Savior God to capture solar energy and put it into a potential energy form known as glucose sugar, so that it can be portable and used in living systems to grow the systems and make living tissue. It's an amazing system. So, having studied God's product a little bit there, I invented a photosystem. Okay, so it's not as cool as his, but it's going to do what his does. I'll show you in a demo in a minute. There it is. That's my photosystem right there. Now, the key here is the way God worked it. Here's a surface photosynthesis. We're going to take a water molecule, H2O. Everybody, that's one oxygen atom connected to two hydrogens. We're going to rip it apart. We're going to take a water molecule apart. Basically 3 pieces. Well, an oxygen atom is going to be ripped away from the molecule. 2 hydrogens are going to be ripped away from the molecule, separated from each other, and 2 electrons will be separated from the molecule. It's going to come apart. Now, this is not easy to do. Water's a very stable compound. It's a very stable compound. We don't break water molecules very much into their oxygen-hydrogen components. I'll tell you one place where they do it routinely, and that's on nuclear submarines. As they take in salt water and using the energy in from the nuclear reactors, they use electrolysis to separate the water molecule into hydrogen and oxygens, and the oxygen supports the men in the submarine. Why they can stay underwater for 7 months in a nuclear submarine, because they can generate the oxygen through electrolysis, but you need power to do that. What's interesting is God has been doing it in a photosystem long before we invented or discovered, electrolysis. He's been tearing apart water molecules, and I'm here to tell you, it's a stable compound. Breaking it up is not easy. And it takes all of that protein machinery I showed you to do that. Here is an experiment. Perhaps some of you have done this experiment, and I know I've done it in the lab. A plant called Elodia or Anacharis. It's a plant maybe you buy for your aquarium tanks. You can pick that up. If you put it under a strong light like this and you invert a test tube over the sprig of Elodia, you have a little funnel here, you'll stimulate the photosynthesis and oxygen will be coming off. It's a product of photosynthesis and you can collect it in the upside down test tube. The oxygen that you're breathing right now came from water molecules that were busted up. The oxygen atoms were combined with other freed oxygen atoms into diatomic O2. And that escapes right out of the plant into our atmosphere. And you're very thankful it does, aren't you? Yes. You don't get that oxygen, you don't pay attention in my lecture.
How was that stored during the non-growth seasons? Why are we still about?
Oh, well, okay, let's talk about the amount of photosynthesis taking place. First of all, somewhere on Earth, photosynthesis is happening. So really, photosynthesis is going on all the time because there's always sunlight on the Earth somewhere. And fortunately, too, God provided an organism, many organisms, that collectively make up what's called phytoplankton in the oceans. Phytoplankton is a host of single-celled, multi-celled, algae-type creatures that just simply float on the ocean or within 3-4 feet of the ocean surface. And they're photosynthesizing. And probably right now, someone could help me on this statistic, but I think better than 50% of the air in this oxygen in this room right now actually is off the oceans, if not more than that. As we get our weather patterns come off the Pacific and across the United States, going that direction to the east, so with that air is oxygen that's come from the phytoplankton out of the oceans. Certainly picks up some from all that corn out there in Iowa in the summer, what have you. But the bulk of the oxygen in our atmosphere is coming from phytoplankton out in the oceans. Photosynthesizing organisms out there. That oxygen to the plant in photosynthesis is a waste product. It's a waste product. It's giving it off. Even though that plant has to respire, they're still respiring out there, but they're producing so much oxygen that they're using some for their own respiration, staying alive, and then shipping the rest off to our atmosphere. Now, according to the theory of evolution, there could be no oxygen in the early atmosphere of the Earth. Oxygen has a way of stealing electrons from molecules and breaking them up. It does not, its presence, unless shielded from, it will rip apart molecules, large molecules. It prevents them from forming. So all textbooks teach that in the primitive Earth atmosphere, there was no oxygen. There could be no oxygen. So somehow then, and of course this story here leaves, as in textbooks, leaves blanks about, well, eventually plants evolved and then the atmosphere filled with oxygen from plants, and that's how we have our oxygen today. They certainly don't discuss how in any kind of detail that evolution took place. But oxygen as an atom from water, oxygen is an electron grabber. He has the second highest electronegativity on the periodic table of all elements. He loves to gather electrons to himself. Well, he can only strip those off of other molecules, weakening those other molecules and deteriorating them. And so oxygen in the atmosphere early on would have been, no, we don't want that, because you can't build big molecules like of living systems with oxygen around. It'll destroy it. It had to be a hydrogen-heavy atmosphere, what's called a reducing atmosphere. And so they have scenarios of methane and hydrogen laden atmospheres, but not oxygen. So oxygen, according to that theory, came around, I don't know when in the evolution of life. They'll tack billions and millions, because you can say anything you want, you know. So here's a little bit about Elodia, and I'm going to take you on a little journey now down to where the photosystems are at that are actually doing the work. We start with a plant here, multi-celled plant, And in the upper left there, if we put it under a microscope, and you probably in your biology class have done this one, I used a Lodia or Anacharis a lot in my classroom because the leaves are very thin and you can easily break one off, put it under a microscope slide, and there's what the student will see right there. You can see the cell outlined in brick form, and then within each of those cells you see those little discs. Those are chloroplasts. Now, that's about a 400 magnification. With an oil immersion lens you can get up to 1,000, and then you'll be looking inside of one of those cells, but that's about as good as you can do. Any further, we start cartooning. So down in the lower right, to give you an idea of what a chloroplast looks like, there you go, the double membrane system, actually a triple membrane system. Inside every chloroplast there are these discs. Membranes, this is a phospholipid membrane that makes up these discs called thylakoid discs. They are somewhat interconnected here, but the membrane on here is very important. We'll come back to it a little bit later. If you did a cross section of the disc, you'd see that there are hollow spaces inside, and that's going to be very important, that you now have an area that is separated from the outside of the thylakoid disc between the inside across a membrane. If we go even closer, and now we're into very, very high magnification, and again, you would not see this kind of animated detail, but if you go, you would see that each thylakoid disc has a lumen, an inside and an outside, separated by a membrane. This is going to be important to create what's called a diffusion gradient across that membrane. That gradient will power an ability to do work and make compounds. We'll show you that in a minute. But that chart that I showed you early on, in the beginning, that colored little diagram, there's about where it would be at. All of that would be on this membrane, in this membrane. Proteins bound in the membrane, and not just one. This thylakoid disc could be covered with, I'm going to say, 100 of them, maybe 1,000 of them on one disc of those systems. And then there's all these discs in one chloroplast. Okay? And then there's all these chloroplasts in one cell. And then you've got millions of these cells in one little plant. So you see there's a lot of these systems in a plant, because that's where the photosynthesis takes place. Photolysis is the breaking of a water molecule using light. And in this case, I'm showing you again and repeating what this process is very important. We got to take apart a water molecule into its constituent parts. One water molecule has one oxygen atom, two hydrogen atoms, and some electrons. And basically that's what it's broken into. Now you need to break two water molecules in order to get enough of the oxygens, two oxygen atoms, to come together to make the gaseous oxygen that goes into our atmosphere, okay? So in breaking two water molecules, we make one atmospheric oxygen molecule, and we make 4 hydrogen atoms that are free of their electrons, so they are charged H+, and basically that's nothing more than a proton. 4 protons, 4 electrons, 1 oxygen molecule. That's what we need and are going to work with. Basically, this is given off for respiration. God had that in mind. These are going to be used to create ATP. In fact, I've showed you this before. And these are going to be used to drive pumps that will move these in a certain direction. But to do that, they got to be charged up. We got to charge up those electrons. So here it is. Here's the whole process. Right here, if you can see it, in this lower corner is the water molecule being broken into oxygen, producing oxygens, and hydrogens are coming off too. Here they are. And the electrons, you see this little E? That's the electron. The electron is going to be escorted through this system here, and work is going to be done with those electrons. I'll show you in a minute. And the hydrogens. The light, now, in this photosystem, the energy of the light is going to do 2 things. It's going to break the water molecule, and it's going to excite the electrons. Now we get to use my demo. How to excite an electron. And what? My fault. I got too close to the speaker. I know. Sorry. Okay. Electron. Ordinary electron. Just came out of the water molecule. Very stable. It's got energy, right? I think it was 77 calories per 100 grams. White potato. Right there. Now, if I lift it up here, it's actually got more energy. If I put it up here, it's got more energy. If I hold it down here, I got less energy. How do you know if you have energy? The ability to do work. If it does something, right? It just gave off some energy. You don't know that, but because it moved, motion is an indication of energy. Now, where did it get the energy to give off when I drove it? Well, I lifted it up off the ground and brought it here. I pumped my energy into the potato. It's got a little more potential energy, right? Now, did it change the amount in the carbohydrate at all? No, still 77 calories per 100 grams. But it's got a little more energy right now because I've lifted it higher off the ground so it could fall. So you got the idea? Well, what a photosystem does. Oh yeah, I need, you know what I don't have here? The sun. So I'm going to borrow some energy from Commonwealth Edison. They don't mind. Is there one right there? Close. The closer by, the better, right? The less cord I got to use, the better. You electricians know that, right, David? My brother's right there. He's a star electrician right there. Leave off the long cord. Okay, where's my electron? Here it is, right here. So, and then after I get it out of here, you didn't see that. I made that. Well, I painted it. Okay. What?
Not supposed to explode.
So it doesn't explode?
Maybe we want it.
Yeah, that would be great if it exploded, really. It would. You know that that probably, okay, let's say that weighed 100 grams, and I just put it in there and I'm giving it 3 minutes. Do you think it'll come out and weigh 100 grams?
No.
It will not.
Evaporation.
What will happen?
Evaporation.
Yes, right. It's going to lose water. And so it will weigh less when it comes out. Now, what won't change is the amount of carbohydrate in the potato, because that's going to stay with the potato. So the amount of energy in carbohydrate is still there. The amount of mass we'll lose, total mass we'll lose, because water's evaporating away. But mass due to carbohydrate will still be there as it's going on. Now, what I want to do, this is what a photosystem does. It takes those electrons that are stolen from water, and it, with the photons from light, using chlorophylls, the chlorophyll molecules, like a funnel, channel photons of light at a target center. That target center is made out of manganese, one manganese atom. Anyway, and electrons are migrated toward that manganese, and it's set up in like a target there. Electrons come in and bam, hit the electron. And now this puts the electron in what is called a higher energy level. That's nothing more than a high school student on sugar. Well, actually an elementary kid on sugar. Anyway, they go to a higher energy level. And in fact, what I'm doing right now to this poor potato is I'm putting him to a higher energy level. I'm kicking him up by hitting him with microwave radiation right now. And that microwave radiation is moving into the molecules and is going to re-radiate out of the molecules as infrared radiation. What's that? Heat. Heat is infrared. And I'm saying that'll do work for me. I can do work with a hot potato. We can do, and God knew that if I get electrons excited, I can get them to do work. Very important work in this process. First, I got to get the electrons, steal them from water. Then I got to excite them, use sunlight photons. Bam! Charge them up to a higher energy level. And while they're charged up, I'm going to escort them along this system. And while they move, electric current, it's what it is. Who invented electricity? God did. We got a current going to go through here. Electrons are going to move across here in a series of redox reactions. Okay. You want to see this do work? Yeah. Hold your hands out.
No.
Oh, cool.
He moved.
Trump.
He's going, oh, cool. Those are all sound, movement, are all evidence of energy. In fact, he keeps going like this. That's work. That's work. That's what that is. Now, he's also got a brain because he put his sleeve on there and went like this. He knows about insulation, right? Insulating. But we can get this to do work. Same thing with the photosystems that God designed. We get the electrons to move across here, and what they do is they run a pump.
Right.
A pump. There's another protein along here who can grab hydrogen ions and escort them to the inside of that disk in the inner area. But they can only do it if they have energized electrons to move these protons from here to here. That's the work. Now, in doing that, the electron loses some energy. Okay? And so there's a second photosystem. Photosystem 1, actually. This is photosystem 2, photosystem 1. At any rate, what this photosystem does takes more light energy, takes that tired electron and boom, boosts them up to another higher energy level. By the way, here's the energy scheme right here. Some of you might, we boost that electron up to that point. He comes down through the electron carriers and runs a pump. And then he goes to the photosystem 1, and boom, he gets boosted up again by a photon. And then he gets escorted away from the whole system and brought out to another series of reactions that I'm not going to show you. They're called the light-independent reactions. And they happen, but they're not as interesting because they're not fixed in a membrane, and this is cool looking, and they're all out there scattered in the liquid and do their work, and so they're not so much fun. But they make the sugar. They eventually make the sugar with excited electrons coming off here through electron carriers. Now, why? Why move the hydrogens here? You guys, most of you know this from one of my previous lectures. We're going to build up hydrogens, lots of them, keep them in here, break them off here, any hanging around out here, bring them in with the pump them in, get hydrogens in here, lots of them. Why? They can't escape. They can't go through this blue zone. They can't get out. They're trapped in here. But there's a lot of them, and more, and more, and more, building up. So they want to get out. They want to diffuse out. They want to go here because there's too many in here, more and more. And they want to get out, but they can't. They're stuck. So where do they go? ATP synthase. This guy. I'll let you out if you'll go through this wheel. And while you're going out through this wheel, you'll turn this camshaft. And while you turn this camshaft in here, that camshaft will bump these enzymes. And as he changes the shape of these enzymes, they will take ADP and a phosphate and put them together to make ATP. That's fuel for the cell. The energy is now in this molecule. Indirectly, by the diffusion flow of these hydrogens out from the inner compartment to the outer compartment. More work getting done. ATP being made. You see, you run on ATP. You guys are all running right now. You need ATP. Desperately, you gotta have ATP. Constantly, you gotta have ATP. So you burn it, you use it, and you recycle it. You put it back together again. And then the ATP goes out to your cell, and you burn it, and you bring them pieces back, you put it back together again. How? ATP synthase. Why? Because the hydrogen's got to flow through him. Where are they coming from? Broken water molecules. And running a proton pump that drives hydrogens in from the energy of electrons. And I got to catch my breath. It's amazing. It's absolutely amazing what's going on here. Troy?
How can an intelligent scientist take a look at that and somehow think that it evolved?
I don't know.
I mean,
I don't know.
aren't these people supposed to have a degree of intelligence?
First chapter of Romans, right?
You see,
Blinded.
there's the chapter 1 of Romans. They just refuse to acknowledge it, but they live in a world of they're not coming to these presentations. They would not come here. They wouldn't come here. They're hanging out with their friends who think like they do. By the way, you're hanging out with your friends who think the way you do too. Yeah. But the opportunities are out there. They can, if they were curious enough, they could, and think about it if they were sometime. Well, I'm not gonna, I can, like you and I agree. It convinces me there's a God. I mean, it's like, duh. So now, respiration. If I wanted to do another lecture, this was today's, right? This is the one that goes on while the lights are going on in green plants, photosystems. This is the one that you're doing 24/7 right here. All of this. Respiration is taking place. This is the breakdown of those sugar molecules and the release of energy, again, to make ATP, which you got to have, ATP. And we're going to bring into this carbon, and then in a series of reactions here, the glucose will be converted to pyruvic acid, and the pyruvic acid will enter as acetyl-CoA into the Krebs cycle, and the Krebs cycle chemistry will turn, and it will produce more molecules that will ultimately make more ATPs for us from the energy of that sugar molecule in the citric acid cycle or the Krebs cycle, which turns beneath this inside here. That's a different lecture, right? Yes. Now, plants. It's an amazing thing. God created plants. Here's a picture of maybe what the earth was like before it broke up, maybe at the time of Noah's flood and so forth. And now today we see it like this. Now watch this. This is interesting about plants. This is a time lapse as you watch winter, spring, summer, fall. Years go past as this clip goes on. Now watch what happens. In fact, you could predict it. Right? Up where we live, what's happening? Winter, spring, summer, fall, winter, spring, summer, fall. Notice? As the ice comes down, the snow comes down to cover of course, you're not going to get any photosynthesis when you're covered with snow. But other areas, summer's down here. However, notice winter in the southern hemisphere. Watch it. When it's summer up north and winter in the south. What's not happening in the south?
Plants aren't getting covered.
Right. Yeah. None of the land is getting covered with snow in the south. Well, where's the equator? Well, the equator is running right here. So the distance from the equator to the furthest southern landmass, is not so far that snow falls down here very often. Now it'll fall at higher altitudes, of course. But it looks like Australia never gets snow. Did you know that? I didn't know that. Not till I watched this for a while. They must get snow, don't they? Any Aussies here?
There's some ski areas there in the mountains.
Up in the mountains. Have to be at a higher altitude. That would explain it. But boy, we sure get our dusting when you take a look at that. I thought that was interesting. And photosynthesis only goes on where you see the green. So, and understand, and on the surface of the oceans where you don't see the green, of course, there's a lot of photosynthesis going on there too, as well. Here are the two organelles that do these two processes, the chloroplast up here, the mitochondria, and your cells are full of mitochondria, and there's a lot of mitochondria. Guess on what kind of cells? Mitochondria make the ATP. That's the energy. Muscle cells have a high content of mitochondria. Make sense? Makes sense? Here's that God's made photosynthesis. This is what God made. That photosystem consists of 51 different proteins. That's 51 different genes that the plant inherits. The product of those genes, the proteins that the genes direct the construction of, takes 51 different genes to make one photosystem. And I think I underestimated the count. When you add in the ATP synthase, which takes 13 more genes, when you add in the coenzymes in between, the cytochromes in between, it's upwards of near 100 different proteins to make one operating photosystem. Now, evolution has a huge problem with that. You understand that it says over gradual long periods of time, we had to evolve these parts, and they had to evolve by changing genetic DNA code in order to, at some point in the future today, be able to make, without mistake or limited mistakes, 100 different amino acid sequences, which is what a polypeptide protein is, so that they will take the right shape, so that they will fit together, so that we can make that photosystem and have it be functional.
That makes a Rubik's Cube seem pretty easy.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I mean, it's off the charts. It's off the charts. Yeah, there, 31 peptides for the photosystem, 8 peptides for the cytochromes, that's the electron transport chain, as they call it, which will shuttle the electrons across. 19 peptides to make photosystem 2, plus 13 peptides to build ATP synthase. That's 58, 13, 71. And I was just counting the different colors and letters, and that's how I got that number. I am sure it's a short number. I'm sure it's a short number. Very conservative. Now, there was a point I was going to make in this, and I forgot. I lost it.
Question,
Yeah.
how many years ago was all of this figured out, roughly?
This complex, I remember teaching at Antioch High School. Even by the time I left, I made the statement that in photosynthesis, we do not know yet how we photolysis the water. We don't know all of the mechanism now. In my reading recently, though, for this presentation, they have much more of an understanding of what has been set up that can, in the collection of proteins here, that could rip apart a water molecule. Ripping apart a water molecule is not in fact, in the end of all of this, you guys, you know what we remake in the end? A water molecule. The end product of respiration, what you're doing right now, is the carbon dioxide you're breathing out, that came from the sugars, and water.
So we get rain.
And water, which is what was ripped apart in the very beginning of photosynthesis. So the whole thing cycles. And God made it cycle. We talk about recycling. Well, we pick up that carbon dioxide in a plant, we bind it in sugars, you take the sugars and respire it back to carbon dioxide, and around and around and around it goes. You take in, the plant takes in the water, rips the molecules apart, uses water for other things too, and uses the pieces to run the photosystems to make the sugar molecule again. Give you the sugar molecule, you'll take it all apart and remake that water and carbon dioxide all over again. And you're breathing it out into this room, CO2.
So the understanding of this process is quite recent.
Yes, and it's still not completely understood, honestly. It is not, they'll admit that.
Darwin didn't know any of this.
Oh no, he wouldn't have had a clue, not a clue. Nowhere close. He thought the inside of a cell was like a Knox block. You know what Knox blocks are, aren't you? That Jello, that rubbery Jello. That's how complex his mind was about the inside of a cell. This is what we know today. We're exponentially further along down the road than where Darwin was at. Yeah. Do I have one more minute? Sure. Oh, okay, watch this one. Okay, this is the coal reserves, plants. These are the coal reserves around the world. And in my mind, that coal, which is all buried around the world, was the vegetation on the earth prior to the flood. That coal represents the amount of biomass on the earth prior to the flood. So if we know how much coal is there, we can do a little, and I did it, calculation to determine how much plant matter got buried there during the flood, which is an indication of how much plant life was on the earth before the flood. Global coal reserves up there, 826 billion tons, okay? Right up there, 826 billion tons of coal. Well, I stumbled across this gentleman's article. The article was entitled Bad Mileage. 98 tons of plant matter is what's consumed when you burn 1 gallon of gas in your car. 98 tons. Now, when I saw that, it just grabbed me. And I thought, wait a minute. Whoa. How can that be? That seems way too extreme. Okay? Now, he said the calculations showed that roughly 1/11 of the carbon in the plants deposited in peat bogs ends up as coal, and that only 1/10,750th of the carbon in plants deposited on ancient seafloors, deltas, lake beds, and so forth, wind up as oil and natural gas. Now, when I saw that, I thought, he had a value in there where he said there are 62 plants alive today, 62 billion tons of carbon in alive plants today, okay? Your little plants around your house are in this figure. It's alive, okay? Well, if that's how much is on the earth today, if I could go back and find out how much coal there is, I could determine then how much plant matter was on the earth prior to the flood. Does that make sense? How you do it? It was a simple conversion. And dividing reserves by living in billions of tons comes out that there's 13.6 times more carbon from plants in coal right now than there is carbon in living plants today. Which means before the flood, there was 13.6 times as many plants on the surface of the earth as there is on the surface of the earth today. Well, I thought that's not so bad. I don't know why it's less now by 13 times, but it does say that the vegetation prior to the flood was very lush. And there is evidence of plant life even in Antarctica. That the climate we're experiencing now on this earth is not exactly the same as the climate before the flood. Some kind of climate was able to support more vegetation. Now you could also say maybe land mass changed. Maybe we have more land mass risen up, and that could be true than prior to the flood. But it seems to me, because you want the petroleum, natural gas, and coal we're using today, you guys, is from plant matter and animal matter that was existing prior to the flood. We're harvesting the energy when we burn coal of plants that were alive prior to the flood. Almost as if God knew we needed an energy supply in the future to support us with the kind of technology and industry and economics that we have in the world today. We're huge energy users, big time energy users. And, well, there was plenty there. It all got buried. It got buried in big clumps and big mats of vegetation that got wiped over with mud and sediment and compressed. Oh, that was another picture I got to show you here. These guys are harvesting peat. This is plant matter. It's going about 4 or 5 feet, maybe deeper. But notice it's still brown. It's very wet. The current theory is that the coal we see out there is the result of peat bogs over long millions of years of time compressing into coal. But the problem we have today is we don't see that happening anywhere. We got tons of peat, we got tons of coal, but we can't find the transition. This is wet, mucky stuff. It won't burn, by the way, like this. They'll put it out there like that and dry it. This is plant matter, the roots and stems of 10 years ago, grass or whatever. See? It's built up. It's soggy. But they'll dry it, and it's burnable. It's combustible. But it's not coal. So the current evolutionary theory is that this wet stuff, peat, turning to lignite, then turns to subbituminous, then bituminous, this plant material compresses. They don't exactly say what the pressure is that compresses it, but we do know that if you compress plant matter and you heat it, you turn anything into coal. Well, not anything, I mean anything organic, you can turn into coal. It can be done in the laboratory. You need water, organic material, and pressure. And you can get coal. In fact, I just harvested a bunch of charcoal out of that fireplace I'm giving you, Dave, because I burned some stuff in there. Some of the plant matter that was deep under the fire didn't burn. It pyrolyzed. The stick got so hot and heated, it drove off molecules that were not carbon, leaving behind a stick that looks like charcoal. It's coal. You know what I'm talking about, right? That stuff that's in your fireplace that didn't burn. And by the way, I save all that. I separate it from the ashes because it makes good starting material for my next fire. That's carbon. Been pyrolyzed. Well, that's in a sense what happens here. The carbon, the other molecules of the plant get driven off in the heat and in the pressure, and you wind up with black coal. Well, heat and pressure were both there during the flood. And that's what created the coal. You had the sediment pressing on this material. You had volcanic activity underneath. Voila. That's a recipe for coal. Now, the problem that Professor Jeff Dukes has is he has to explain how this happens over millions and millions of years. So he's assuming that coal, that oil has been there for millions of years. He has to have a very slow process to get that into coal, because we don't even see it happening. Then evolutionists will say, because it's so slow. It takes so long. And so the reason these numbers, why it takes 98 tons of plants is because it takes so long for the plant material to turn into an organic compound by evolutionary processes. And so it's 98 tons. Well, okay. That's what they put in the textbooks. And that's why their numbers are so, I think, inflated. Or 1/10,750th. That's a very small fraction of the carbon that we're seeing in plants today wind up in oil and natural gas. Why so little? Because we don't even see it happening, so therefore it must take a lot to get what we have there over a long period of time. Well, it's easily explainable by a flood. It was made not that long ago, okay? And God put it there so we could have some energy other than the sun, so you can run your car or what have you right now. I think He just equipped us for the current energy scenario we're in today.